You know what? I'm not even gonna do a padded out video essay intro because I'm sure this game needs absolutely no introduction, especially as the primary cause of what's called the rhythm game boom outside of Japan, and it being the reason of existence for so many other rhythm games that you know and love today. If you're playing a vertical scrolling rhythm game, chances are DDR did it first, or it'd be more accurate to say Konami did it first with the release of Beatmania in 1997. Although this isn't nearly as iconic as DDR outside of Japan, inside Japan, Beatmania is largely the cause of rhythm games becoming so popular, and it was such a success that Konami changed the name of the division that developed the game from the Games and Music division to BeMoney. Now, of course, the main reason games from BeMoney became so popular is because of how innovative they were. They broke the mold and created unique and challenging gameplay, and popularized a whole new wave of gaming at the same time. But there was one other huge reason for the success of BeMoney, especially when it comes to games such as DDR. Its timeless selection of music. There have been hundreds of artists across DDR, let alone BeMoney as a whole, and if you ever become insane enough to keep track of all these artists, you may notice that there's one artist in particular who dominates in terms of contributions across BeMoney games. Naoki Maeda, the paragon of rhythm game music, responsible for some of the most recognizable songs from BeMoney, a lot of which you may not even know are made by him because of just how many different aliases he uses. As someone who'd been playing piano since the age of 4 and graduated from university with a degree in music, it was only natural that Naoki would of course want to begin composing, and his journey for that began in approximately 1995 when Naoki first officially joined Konami. At this time, Naoki joined the Konami AM division, otherwise known as the Konami Amusement Machine division, the division responsible for producing coin-based arcade games. Here, he worked as both a sound producer and a composer under a group called the Konami Kukeiha Club, Konami's dedicated sound team at the time. Kukeiha literally translates to square wave, and it was a pretty cool way of representing the use of square waves for the chiptune soundtrack era. This club is also huge, having almost 91 recorded members come and go through the years until it completely disbanded in early 2003. The club has had a hand in many of the soundtracks from the older days of Konami, and there are a few among these where Naoki was present and listed as a contributor. In fact, Naoki is listed to have contributed to 3 games released in 1995, the first of which being Twinbee Yahoo in April of 1995, a vertical scrolling shoot 'em up arcade game serving as the 9th installment in the Twinbee series as a whole, as well as the 3rd and final arcade installment. The soundtrack here was primarily composed by him, who for some reason went under the alias Enzoniku Maeda, as well as 3 others, 118 and Kazuhiro Seno, who's someone that'll also come to contribute some tracks to BeMoney. There's also one other name listed here, legendary Konami and Castlevania composer Yamane Michiru, who didn't directly contribute to this title, but a work from the 5th Twinbee game, Detana Twinbee, was partially used here. The soundtrack itself was made to suit the upbeat atmosphere of the game, whilst maintaining the same level of intensity of dodging one-shot projectiles and shooting literally anything that moves. Twinbee itself is a pretty successful series in Japan, so this, along with the 2 games he contributed to, put his foot very deep in the industry in only his first few years as a composer, with those 2 other games being Saramanda 2, another vertical scrolling shmup, and Taizen Tokaidama, a puzzle game based on the Taizen Pazurudama series. It wasn't long after this when he was noticed and contacted by a game producer from the Konami Computer Entertainment Tokyo studio, a subsidiary of Konami that was already famous for being responsible for the development of games like Gradius and Castlevania. The KCET team had an idea for a brand new game, and they needed all the help they could get, especially when it came to music. This is what led to the game producer Yoshihiko Ota recruiting Naoki for this brand new project in early 1998 to work as a composer, and along with a team of 23 others. This game would end up being DanceDanceRevolution, released on September 26, 1998. It was in this game that Naoki made an unforgettable entrance into the rhythm game music scene. First of all, Naoki was the only one who composed directly for this game and created Konami originals. The rest of the songs in DDR are songs that have been licensed from various Dance Mania albums, a series of compilations mainly consisting of high-energy Eurodance remixes. The number of songs composed by Naoki also increased over time. In the original release of the game, there was only 1 song made by him, but soon there was an internet ranking version released, which is exactly what it sounds like, and this came with 2 new extra songs by Naoki, all under different aliases. In other words, Naoki was responsible for 3 fan favorites, where he had 3 separate aliases. First, we had Make It Better by Mitsuo, a chill reggae song that's also infamous for having some of the worst stepping in DDR history. This is actually a pretty interesting one because of its origin. In the location test versions of DDR, there was actually another song that never made it to the full release of the game that was very similar in style to Make It Better, called Money by the Raga Twins. I mean, just listen to the both of them. They use the same key, have a very similar tempo, use the same instruments. I mean, hell, even the beginning sounds the same. I don't want to stir the pot, but this whole thing just seems like a get back at the Raga Twins. I mean, even the title is called Make It Better, for Christ's sake. Because of the subliminal messaging and extreme similarities between them, it's very often speculated that Make It Better was made to replace money for the original release. Unfortunately, I can't confirm or deny this, though I am inclined to believe it, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of licensing issue behind the scenes that stopped money from releasing. After this was Trip Machine by Desire, a song that lives up to its name in terms of how tricky the rhythms are, making it one of the harder charts of the game. The composing style of this was a good way to describe Naoki's style at the time, when he was a bit newer to this sort of music. This felt very experimental, and unlike today where rhythm game songs would usually have a very clear structure, this more just felt like music rather than a song. Hell, I'm not afraid to take it one step further and say it just felt like a bunch of sounds slapped together. It definitely did its job though, and it does sound really cool towards the end. The final song after this one is one that anyone that's played DDR even remotely seriously knows. Why? Because this was the hardest chart of the game at the time, and because of that, it gained a pretty legendary status among rhythm gamers. Today, there's also numerous remixes and derivative works as tributes to this piece of history. This is none other than Paranoia by 180. Looking back on the song, my view on this is much the same as my view on Trip Machine. It sounds very primitive with the instruments and samples used, and if this were outside of DDR, it's likely this would have been glossed over. Naoki himself also states him being very limited in his ability to express himself, due to finite budgets and a lot of restrictions that came from Konami. But because of the gameplay, how unique it sounded at the time, and just how fast it was, clocked at 180 BPM, this ended up being a classic among people that played DDR, and this is one of the most recognizable in the series as a whole, with even some known rhythm game composers today being inspired by it. Of course, no one could have anticipated the explosion of DDR across the world, not even Konami themselves, so this put Naoki in the spotlight very quickly, though not as much as it should have thanks to the aliases used. As a matter of fact, one of the main reasons Naoki used aliases was because at the time, it was taboo for musicians in the Japanese game industry to be credited under real names. That's kinda dumb. Either way, here's a basic business question. When a product you make unexpectedly succeeds, what do? Make more products similar to it and milk as much as you can. And well, that's exactly what BeForU would end up doing. And since they would obviously need more music, Naoki was hired to be the official sound producer of what was originally meant to be a sequel to DDR. DDR's second mix, released in January of 1999, but his role would end up lasting through more than 10 titles in the DDR franchise, across almost 10 years, with his role stopping at DDR-X. A lot of his earlier works in DDR had the same fate as Paranoia, and were met with a lot of restrictions in how it should have been composed, but as time went by, he would eventually begin to be able to express his musical style more. In fact, the DDR 4th mix is the game where Naoki says he was able to express his music the best, with this game having gems like Burning the Floor, Love Again Tonight, and the icon of the game, BeForU. This is a world of difference from his previous songs that we heard in the original DDR, and you can tell there's absolute truth in what Naoki said about his expression. It feels like there's so much more emotion in this than his past songs, mainly because the melody is much more developed now, and actually pretty catchy. And overall, it's a super energetic song, whose pace is perfect for DDR, and captures the spirit of dance in general perfectly. Bear in mind, 4th mix was released only about 2 years after the first one. They were pumping these out pretty quickly, and soon Konami would try and capitalize on an opportunity that would either take them to the greatest heights of success, or be a catastrophic failure. See, in late 2000, shortly after the release of DDR 4th mix, Konami came up with a genius idea. The music was largely what carried games by BeForU, right? So why not create a group of idols dedicated to singing for these games? That way, well, first of all, they wouldn't have to worry as much about licensing, since they had another in-house source of music. And secondly, this would have a pretty big wave of butterfly effects. Initial promotion would handle itself, since all one would have to do is stop by an arcade machine and select a song by them to hear them. Then, leveraging off that, they could begin making music outside of that, and have a much better chance of going mainstream. If this worked, not only would Konami have a world-famous pop group at their command, but they would also have the power to draw in even more DDR players using the power of this pop group. And at that point, well, let's just say DDR would go beyond even being a household name. Long story short, this idea was perfect, and so Konami got to work. In November of 2000, Konami held a competition and scouted young women across the country, looking for a group with talent, ability, and emphasis. After many trials and tribulations, 4 young women would end up being shortlisted to make the final group. Kosaka Ryu at age 15, Shirai Shinoria at age 19, Komatsu Yoma at age 26, and Maihara Shiina at age 21. These 4 were promptly signed to Konami for distribution of their music and put under the leadership of none other than Naoki. Not only would Naoki be in charge of the management of the group, he would also be responsible for the composition and arrangements they would sing over, and this group was called Nothing Yet. First, a national contest was also held to decide on a good name for a group born from DDR, and after some time, they decided to call themselves BeForU. Sound familiar? After their formation, the group wasted no time at all in getting a song out. They promptly released their first single, Dive, a super high energy J-pop based song whose instrumental is much to the liking of music in DDR. This song is said to have been promoted widely throughout the J-pop community, despite feedback toward the song being negative, according to Naoki himself. Later on in the DDR Extreme Weekly Journal, Naoki goes into depth about what led up to the creation of BeForU, with the single question, can we do something more entertaining in DDR that has never been done before, being the main catalyst for the idea behind it. This song would become extremely popular, without even being released in a game yet, and soon would even end up featuring in the 2001 Wasabi film. Afterwards, this same song would end up debuting in the DDR 5th mix, alongside a bunch of new songs from Naoki himself, which he says in that same weekly journal was a bit of a turning point for him. Part of the lead up to BeForU's creation was because he'd been working non-stop on music, and he generally just felt unfulfilled with the creation of a lot of his works. In order to combat this frustration, Naoki started to listen to trance music, and opted to create trance but in a way that sounded different for the 5th mix. This led to the creation of both ecstasy and insertion. Even though they have elements of trance in the instrumentality, they both have higher BPMs than your average trance song, and a melody that develops much further than that. I even think you could argue that they're hardcore instead, based on their general soundscape and how pumped up they get you while playing. Either way, these are both super underrated songs from this point in time. After these two, he made a song that explicitly expressed his unfulfillment. He just took all of his negative emotions and decided to pack it into one track. Through all the frustration and all of the pain, what resulted was nothing short of a masterpiece that restored his musical vision and confidence in the creation of his tracks, and that was of course Healing Vision. The 5th mix was a time of struggle for both Naoki and BeForU. Naoki was at the point of overworking himself, and BeForU was under a lot of pressure to improve and adapt quickly, especially after criticism about their debut song. So being able to make a song as common as this in the midst of all that feels like a miracle. Though at the same time, amidst the relaxing breakbeat, the atmosphere and melody of the song feels almost haunting, as if it were foreshadowing what would take place next. Here's the deal, BeForU would step up the game and continue producing music, greatly improving upon their initial debut to the scene in the next few DDR iterations. For instance, they would release Firefly for the DDR 6th mix, a song with a similar style to Dive, but with better sounding vocals and some pretty cool guitar riffs. Not only did the DDR 6 mix have this banger, but this released alongside classics from Naoki yet again, with the most notable being the infamous, the legendary Max 300. Nowadays, for top players, this probably wouldn't even be warm-up material, but back in the day, this is one of the most brutal shots, not because of the patterns, but because of the sheer speed and stamina required, the song itself being clocked at 300 BPM. As a matter of fact, it's said that Naoki received a lot of fan mail from DDR players, begging him to produce a 400 BPM song for some reason, and originally, this was what Max 300 would have been set at, but unfortunately, after the development, it was deemed too difficult for anyone to clear at the time, so it was nerfed. And even though it's considered fairly easy now, it still maintains itself as a decent challenge for intermediate players today. Max 300, without a doubt, holds a legendary status in DDR and rhythm game history, and this is the beginning of a series of charts across the DDR series designed to only test the fastest of players. Back to DDR 6 mix though, something strange happened in the game's song list. If you played through every song, you may have noticed that there was a song with a familiar voice, particularly in the song called True, which the game also has two mixes of, a radio edit and a trance sunrise edit. That's because this was a single by none other than Kosaka Ryu, the youngest of the artists from BeForU. This was already a red flag. Remember that all members from BeForU are managed by Naoki, but mainly Konami, and they were meant to function as a group. So why were members now seemingly being chosen to put singles out over other members? Well, maybe it's just a one-off thing, right? Hell, maybe Kosaka was just really eager about releasing new music, and it seemed like there was no harm in it. But this pattern of choosing individual members for singles would continue, for some reason, throughout Bemini's titles for the next few years. Again, it seems like a red flag, but thankfully, everyone in the group got a chance to show off by themselves, or almost everyone. For some reason, Kosaka was frequently picked to perform solos, and by the DDR 7 mix in 2002, she had 3 of her own singles, 4 if you count the different versions of True. Komatsuyama also featured in the DDR 7 mix with her song Ever Snow, which is honestly one of my personal favorites from anything related to BeForU. One of the few times where In my opinion, the instrumental and voice complement each other perfectly, courtesy of Naoki as usual. Shiraishi Noria also had a track in Beatmania 7 style, an ethereal sounding hip hop song called Glorious Days. By the time the DDR7 mix released, the only member left out was Maehara Shiina, who, in case you don't know, was the person who was normally depicted as the drummer of the group. For the time, this was all well and good. The group continued to release songs, with them releasing Graduation for DDR Extreme, Freedom for the DDR Party Collection, and even branched out into Guitar Freaks and Drum Mania over the next few years. However, still, this model of picking singers for singles continued, and by 2003, bearing in mind that this group has been in prominence for about 3 years now, Maehara Shiina didn't have a single to her name, and after releasing Shikara for Guitar Freak's 9th mix and the Drum Mania 8th mix, in early 2004, she abruptly left the group. Now, of course, the reason for her departure is never confirmed, and she seems to have long left the rhythm game idoless life behind, so I couldn't manage to get a hold of her, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if she was actually being treated unfairly, to the point where she was basically being ignored for her own opportunities to create songs. At the same time though, for all we know, maybe she just really didn't like the life of being an idol, and perhaps because of that, she avoided singles. The point is, it's not on us to speculate. However, what we can be sure of was that her departure was the beginning of the group's path to ruin. On the BeForU page on the Konami site, on the 19th of March 2004, Shiina's departure was announced, with a note from Shiina herself saying a basic goodbye that makes me believe it's not from Shiina herself, as well as a message from Naoki, which essentially boils down to, instead of calling it a departure, it should be called a graduation. And well, what happens when someone graduates? New members come in to fill in the gaps. Honestly, they were scarily quick to try and replace her, but obviously for a group as big as they were back in the day, it did make sense. As a result, Konami held yet another contest, looking to bring on board not one, but 2 singers to replace Shiina. The contest was a big success in this regard, so much so that there was actually a tie for first place with one other person, and this led to all 3 of the members being brought into the group in July of 2004. Sotohana Risa, Arizara Miharu, and Minami Sayaka. This was the second generation of BeForU. BeForU Next. This was it. The ultimate rhythm game idol group. They had a lot of potential, and this time, BeForU was planning on finishing what they started last time. They started off strong with the debut into Beatmania 11, Red, in October of 2004, with a new group song that was very similar to BeForU's original debut, perhaps paying homage to it. This was Ki Set Ki. And not only did it find its way to Beatmania, but it also got a cool music video to go along with it, showcasing each member in full fashion. The song was a pretty big hit, especially by the time it hit DDR machines some years later. And to put icing on the cake, this wasn't all Naoki accomplished in this game. This was also the same Beatmania that Naoki and legend composer Touch collaborated on to create the now iconic track, Red Zone. Even if you don't play rhythm games, if you frequent the internet enough, chances are you've heard it at least once in your life, from the various remixes of it. Nothing beats the original though. After this, the group contributed a few songs to Guitar Freaks and Drum Mania, namely Scenario and Blackout. But apart from that, the group was actually fairly inactive. This was because BeForU Next was preparing for their second album, BeForU 2, which they planned on releasing a while later in 2006. Their first album didn't gain much traction, so this time they wanted to focus a lot more on promotion. And Konami decided it was time to take advantage of the fact that the group was newly formed by taking them to their first ever concert, held in ZEP Tokyo. This concert was considered such a big deal for the group that it was also filmed and sold exclusively on DVD, called BeForU First Live at ZEP Tokyo 2006. And generally speaking, this is where the group would start to hit their peak, as the concert was a huge success. They would keep this momentum going by releasing some of these songs into DDR Supernova, and they also began preparing for a third album. Hell, these guys even had a song to be used as an anime ending for the sports anime Major, which remains one of their most popular songs to this day. It was all going insanely well, and now all they had to do was release their third album, and they would finally be on their way to a massive break. Well, the album released on March of 2007, and although the album itself wasn't bad, in fact to a BeForU fan a lot of these songs should be familiar, the album performed far below expectations, debuting at 126 on the Oricon charts before falling off entirely after only a week. This ended up dealing a pretty big blow to the group, and it wasn't long before the group started to fall apart, yet again. At first, activity started to dwindle even more than it already had. There were a lot of hiatuses and absences when members were called upon. Sooner or later, Arizawa Miharu fell severely ill and was from there forced to leave the group. Following this, Yoma Komatsu, one of the founding members, left the group in pursuit of a solo career. This only led to further ruin. Soon, Shiraishi Noria and Sotahana Risa would leave for unspecified reasons, leaving only Minami Sayaka and Ryu Kosaka as the last women standing. After cancelling a very understaffed concert with the now two-man team, BeForU went quiet for months, before suddenly re-emerging again with the announcement of another 3 new members: Fukushita Megumi, Tachibana Ayano, Nishiuchi Hiromi. Okay, I guess. But after these additions, Minami Sayaka would also leave the group due to illness. Even though there were new additions, the group was clearly still splitting at the seams, and it didn't seem like it'd be long before their eventual demise. They were given one last chance though. See, soon, the group would be bought out from Konami to a label called Gambit, a sub-label of the Japanese label giant Avex Trax. These guys are seriously no joke. Not only does Avex Trax house some of the most popular Eastern artists, but they actually have prominence in many countries internationally, particularly when it comes to music used in TV shows, with some of the artists that were formerly signed to them in some way, including Miley Cyrus and Demi Lovato. Actually, it turns out BeForU were already signed to Avex previously, with the release of their 3rd album in hopes of getting more promotion in, but unfortunately that didn't go well. But again, they had one more chance, and for that they released a new album, Shangri-La, in 2008. They would also make a video to perform a single under that name, where they dressed a lot more different than usual. Whether this was because of Gambit's marketing strategy, or because they just thought it would fit with the theme, is a mystery. But regardless, this, along with the actual full album, ended up doing even worse than the 3rd album, with Shangri-La debuting at a shocking 221 on the Oricon charts, and again dropping off the charts by the end of the week. That was the last straw for BeForU. All activity would eventually cease, and soon the BeForU website would go offline as well. All the members of BeForU would end up going their own separate ways, and Kosaka Ryu, the last member standing who had been there since the beginning, made a heartbreaking announcement in 2009. BeForU was over. The way this group fell apart must have been painful to watch under the eyes of Naoki, especially as someone who had been in charge of the group since the beginning and placed so much hope in the group's success. Although this applies to everyone involved, this is undeniably a huge part of Naoki's career, and he had no choice but to just move on from it. Luckily, he already had a pretty big venture into rhythm games by the point of BeForU's disbandment. In fact, not only has Naoki made numerous legendary singles by this point, Naoki was also part of a group formed time ago in 2002. Well, not really a group, but more of a duo, alongside a vocalist who goes by the name Junko Karashima, or Jun. This was the group TERRA. Think of the famous Nanahira and Camellia combo, but instead we have Jun for vocals, and Naoki's support with his compositions, and the influence is a lot more of a J-pop and rock influence, specifically hyper J-pop and rock. These guys joined up and made their first appearance all the way back in Poppin' 8 with the release of Stars, and from then on they continued to release more music concurrently with Naoki's usual work. Perhaps the most recognizable song from this duo was the song that first appeared in Beatmania 10 style and was later adopted to DDR Supernova, one that many feel nostalgic about to this day. Hyper J-pop number 4, Doll. This sounds like a run-of-the-mill anime opening, but hey, back in the day, this is the kind of energy people needed to start scratching their controller or stomping on their pads. TERRA is also responsible for Hana Ranman, Flowers, which has over 3.4 million views on YouTube. By 2012, Naoki was even drafted to compose for an anime opening, for an old but gold anime called 07 Ghost, and here Naoki composed Aka no Kakera, sung by Suzuki Yuki and written by Kana and Noria. Basically, by now, Naoki had a reputable career in music and composition, and he was very versatile with his style. Whether you want energetic dance music, chill and breakbeats, or J-pop, Naoki can and will supply you with it. All until now, Naoki had continued to produce for Bemini, making song after song after song for various titles, especially, of course, for DDR. The aliases he uses for each of these songs are different every time. In fact, here's an exercise. Go onto Remy Wiki, see if you can find one song made by him that you recognize but had no idea was made by him, and comment what it is below. I suspect if you played any older Bemini game actively, you'll be able to find at least one. Speaking of, when it comes to his song history on Bemini, the songs keep on coming, and it continues right up until the year of 2013, when suddenly, it stops. Suspiciously, right around this time, Naoki had also made some cryptic tweets alluding to gaining power for a completely new departure this summer in 2013. Eventually, some shocking news that you probably saw coming, to be honest, broke out. Naoki left Konami. This wasn't a sudden announcement or anything of that nature, however. In fact, the weird thing about his departure is that there was no announcement from either party. There were no goodbyes, there were no tweets, absolutely nothing to commemorate one of the most influential composers from their company. Or, on the other hand, commemorate the company that gave him a platform in the first place. Just complete radio silence. The only way people found out about this was when people began to notice that Naoki no longer listed himself as an employee of Konami on his Facebook page back in 2012. This is where wild speculation began surrounding why Naoki could have left. For example, a popular rumor is that Konami allegedly removed all pictures and videos of Naoki across many games after he left, indicating some kind of fallout between them. I couldn't find any damning evidence of this happening, so it's likely just a rumor, but at the same time, Konami is pretty well known for the treatment of their employees, especially their ex-employees. So, wow, what a shocker that would be. But I digress. Nothing was really confirmed, and there was, again, complete radio silence from both parties in regards to the matter. So the community was left in complete darkness for months. Later on in 2013 was when that tweet I showed earlier went out, when someone asked if Naoki could attend an event, which added a little more fuel to the fire, but again, didn't confirm anything, until suddenly, in September of 2013, a new article came out on a website called Game Watch, where Naoki is in a conference of some kind with a group of people. Okay. Announcing a new game by Capcom. So, I guess this was the confirmation that Naoki did leave Konami. It seems logical that his reasons behind it is just to pursue his own independent career, but just like last time with Make It Better, only Naoki, Konami, and God knows the real reason. As for what he was doing at Capcom, well, for the people that don't remember, smartphone technology really started to boom in the early 2010s, and of course, this is when mobile games for smartphones also began to gain some traction. Hoping to jump more in this new wave of gaming, Capcom took this opportunity to begin working on their first rhythm game and create this for mobile, killing two birds with one stone. And as you know, what makes a rhythm game is his music, so who better for the job of lead producer than only the legend himself, Naoki, fresh after leaving Konami. After a lot of teasing and development, this game would eventually release on the 27th of November under the name Crossbeats. It was a simple concept. You would have these circuits appear on screen with arrows running down each path simultaneously into a circular junction. The moment the arrows reach that junction, you have to tap that junction. And if you have a circle with 4 arrows running into it, you have to hold that tap until another 4 arrows follow those, and release when those 4 arrows reach the junction, creating a release timing mechanic. For the brainlets, basically, it's a lot like Citus, but with a different aesthetic and release timings. This game had what it needs to be a pretty big success, since it honestly was a pretty fun game, and Naoki of course did really well with the production of the songs in the game, my personal favorite being Azitate. But ultimately, there was one huge issue that was likely the cause of its surprisingly quick downfall. It had a free-to-play model. Essentially, Crossbeats used a ticket-based system in which you start off with a capacity of 10 tickets, and each song, no matter which difficulty, costs 5, yes, you heard me right, 5 tickets to play, which means you only get 2 plays if your bar is full. Oh, but your tickets obviously recover, right? Well, you get 1 ticket every 20 minutes. In other words, once you run out of tickets by playing 2 songs, you'd have to then wait 1 hour and 40 minutes to play a single song. And obviously, if you want to do more than that, then you better pay up, my brother. Not at all bad compared to some of the more horrid free-to-play models I've seen, but come on. This was supposed to be a rhythm game. These games thrive on keeping the player focused and in the zone. As soon as you do something that breaks the player's attention span, especially when it's something they can't control, you should be expecting to lose that player. And that's exactly what happened. A lot of people tried playing under the pretense that it was a completely free-to-play rhythm game, and unsurprisingly, got turned off by this scheme. As a result, it ended up flopping, and in 2015, there would be an arcade machine to try and revive the series, called Crossbeats Rev. This seemed like it would actually suit the game's business model a lot more than trying to market it to people expecting free gameplay, but unfortunately, the damage had already been done, and by 2018, both Crossbeats and Crossbeats Rev discontinued their services. Well, that was quick. Now what? Well, the most recent thing Naoki got up to was creating an entirely new indie studio called Unlimited Studio. It's still a fairly new one, with the only work being released there so far being Seven's Code, launched in October of 2019, another rhythm game that was made as a spiritual successor to Crossbeats. This was actually fairly popular and looked a lot better of a game than its counterpart, but unfortunately for some reason it only had a 1-year plan. In other words, although you can still play Seven's Code, there's no more additional content developed for the game after October of 2020. After this, no one really knows what Naoki is up to. His last tweet was about Seven's Code's discontinuation, and he's generally inactive everywhere else. Above all, I hope he's okay. With everything he's managed to accomplish, he deserves giving himself a big break or even complete retirement. I don't think anyone would be mad with that. That being said, I have to admit, I never got the chance to experience Naoki's legacy firsthand when DDR was at its prime. I was but a small child after all, and we just didn't have money like that. But seeing all this today, and learning about everything that Naoki's had influence on has been really fun, and there is no doubt in my mind that Naoki is a legendary rhythm game artist. Whatever he plans to do next, he has the whole community by his side, both young and old, and I hope if you're a younger rhythm gamer like me, you manage to learn something new. That being said, be sure to support Naoki and whatever he plans on doing next. Links to his platform should be in the description, and if you enjoyed, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter for updates. A little warning for if you are subscribed, videos right now are in a very they come out when they're ready schedule, since I'm busy keeping up with school and general life responsibilities, so I apologize in advance for any future huge upload gaps. The gap this time though was because I was just burnt out, if I'm honest, so yeah, sorry about that one. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in a bit.